Good evening. Welcome to The Pipeline. This is the Western Standard's weekly panel show where a number of us will go through the top issues, break them down, analyze them, figure out what they mean, or at least give our best interpretation of them. My name is Cory Morgan. I am one of the columnists in Alberta for the Western Standard, and I am joined by our end-to-end Dave Naylor, our news editor. How's it going, Dave?
Great, Cory. Great to be here.
Good. And our opinion editor, as always, on the show, Nigel Hannaford.
Going great here, too.
Good.
Thanks, Cory.
No problem. What a week. It's just
craziness.
It was really difficult to figure out what to talk about first. There's so much going on out there.
So we call a target-rich environment.
Yes. Well, it's better than a dearth, I think.
Yeah.
So it depends on what the issues are. We got a lot of them to talk about today. We'll get through a few. Plus, we're going to be pulling in Sean Polzer shortly to talk about things from the World Petroleum Congress. And we'll also have Jonathan Bradley checking in from the march and some protests downtown. So you know what? Let's talk about our sponsor first while everything starts getting together here. And that is the Canadian Shooting Sports Association. They've been a fantastic sponsor. The reason we can do these shows, have these reporters on the ground, people out there covering this stuff, is due to subscribers and sponsors. And if you enjoy firearms, you purchase firearms, you collect them, you hunt, whatever, it's your business. You're a law-abiding citizen, but you need to be a member of the Canadian Shooting Sports Association. They're standing up for your right to maintain your hobby, profession, whatever you like that involves firearms. And if you are not a member of that, you are allowing the government to set the agenda against your firearm ownership and use. So check them out, guys. They really stand up for your rights, and they've been a fantastic sponsor. Canadian Shooting Sports Association, their website is cssa-cila.org. Or again, just Google them, Canadian Shooting Sports Association. All right, well, let's get into it. Dave, maybe I'll get you to kind of frame it, and we'll pull Sean in. We've got a very big event happening in Calgary this week.
Yes, first time in 20 years, the World Petroleum Congress.
Mm-hmm.
I always get it wrong. 5,000 delegates from across the world. These are the movers and shakers of the oil industry. Saudi Arabia, from India, South America, you name it, they're here doing deals, talking with the governments and whatnot. And unfortunately, they've been getting mixed messages from our federal counterparts and Danielle Smith, the Premier of Alberta. They've been offering different messages, which Sean can talk about.
Sure thing. Well, maybe I'll start with Sean then, since you're there on the ground, Sean, seeing things. It's unfortunate. It's supposed to be a global thing, a world thing, but it looks like kind of a local pissing match of sorts is developing between the Premier and the Prime Minister's representative.
Yeah, Natural Resources Minister Jonathan Wilkinson was one of the co-speakers at the opening ceremonies on Sunday while protests were happening outside the conference hall. But while in the conference hall and in his speech, he spoke of the need to basically keep the oil in the ground, that oil demand is going to fall to 25 million barrels a day, that just the usual just transition narrative that the federal government has been pushing for a long time. Premier Smith took exception to it. She said at her own media availability, people said she had steam coming out of her ears. So she rewrote her speech on the fly and basically offered point by point rebuttal to Wilkinson, basically reinforcing her narrative, which is that oil is not going away, demand is not going down, Alberta is not going to reduce oil production. We will reduce emissions, but reducing oil production, emissions caps, all the rest of that is off the table, period. And in her media availability the next day, she said that those are hard red lines, and that her government intends to stand firm. How it played over with the international audience, I think, is kind of like what you said, Cory. It's a bit of a pissing match, and I think people are a little bit confused at what the actual message is and what the support is from the various levels of government. That's kind of unfortunate.
Yeah, well, and Nigel, like these summits are important, these gatherings. I mean, there's the top world oil producers in the world, thousands of them, major players. I would imagine the last thing they expected, though, was to be lectured by somebody on peak oil theorism and I mean, I understand they know transition's coming along, perhaps, but that sort of attitude coming towards them, basically saying, "Hey guys, you're on the way out the door."
Cory, one of the things that Sean got in his article this morning, but he didn't say just now, I think it's very, very important, is that you've got oil producers from Africa, and they point out that on that continent, there are still hundreds of millions, I think the figure was 900 million, people who do not have electricity. And they're not impressed by the theoretical considerations advanced by the government of Canada as to how we should all use less energy. They want to use more because they can't develop without energy. Our own development rested on energy. They want the same opportunities. And they're probably too polite to say what they really think of the federal of the federal announcements and the priorities that they're giving to getting us off fossil fuels. But I would have to imagine that they are very much on side with Danielle Smith when she is saying we need to keep the lights on and the heat on when it's winter. You can't rely on sunshine or wind.
And it seems we have some sort of climate summit going on somewhere on the planet that our ministers and activists are jet setting over to lecture us on our carbon use and things such as that. Yet it still wasn't enough, I guess, for our Canadian government. They had to hit on one where we're talking about oil production.
You must be thinking of COP28.
Yeah, COP28
yes.
in Dubai. And even today, Prime Minister Trudeau's in New York at the global summit there. He's doubling down on, and giving more money to developing countries so they can cut down on their climate or increase their climate change. So the Calgary situation was embarrassing, Cory, in that you go to these big things and you're supposed to present a united front, and especially when it's on our home soil. It's it's in the home of Canada's oil and gas, and to present such different fronts would have been an embarrassment to the hosts.
I mean, one of the things that the Prime Minister is doing is giving Romania $3 billion to do what? To buy small modular reactors. Give it to Alberta if you want Alberta to get off fossil fuels. Our own government is interested. They announced a study. I should be letting Sean talk about this, but this is what is the matter with these people?
That's a big question. But, we can talk about that a little more. Well, we got Sean on standby from the floor of the Congress, though. I guess aside from our domestic sniping going on, Sean, how have events been proceeding so far at the summit? Do the delegates at least seem to be, having some productive discourse and events going on?
Yeah, I think it's been very productive. There's a lot of intermingling. Just even walking around, I just see people from all countries and all cultures. And the theme of the conference is this road to net zero. And I think the message that's coming out of it is that proceeding too hard, too fast is going to put a lot of hardship on people, and that the transition, it would be dangerous to accelerate it at the expense, not just from the developing countries who feel like they're getting ripped off from the north. These are countries that have been colonialized for a very long time, but also here in the north, that transitioning these energy systems, it's going to take a lot of thought. It's going to take a lot of technology, and it's something that isn't just going to happen overnight. So
are there more speeches, I guess, and presentations from the federal provincial representatives over the course of this Congress? Is there kind of a room to at least reset it to a more positive note?
I think that the government role is pretty much done. What we're seeing here in the last couple of days is more presentations from those developing countries. There was an American speaker this morning talking about geopolitical realities and resetting some of these great power relationships with countries like China. Again, the overarching thing is this energy transition. It's against the backdrop of the war in Ukraine, just all kinds of tensions that have, there's a lot of housekeeping that has to be done before we can make this concerted shift. And that was the message from Saudi Aramco CEO Nasser, who basically said that we risk creating an energy crisis basically of our own making. This one is going to be policy driven, and it's going to be potentially even more crippling than the shocks that we've seen in the 70s.
Well, I guess, we can hope it is a big affair. And then aside from those other, the politicians being politicians, hopefully it's a productive gathering and some good, deals are made and some plans are put forth. I've heard we've gotten between you and some gelato, so I'll let you go pretty soon here. Is there anything you'd like to add before I let you go on this?
Well, I actually have to take over a prayer room to find a quiet spot, and I think I'm disrupting some of my Congress colleagues from facing Mecca and their cultural sensitivities as well. So it's probably a good thing that I go.
Okay, well, send our apologies for the incursion, and thanks for giving us the updates, Sean, and we look forward to your continuing coverage.
Okay, thanks, guys.
Thanks.
It should be noted today, Cory, that British Prime Minister Sunak came out and said we are rolling back the dates of are scheduled. Where they're going to mandate electric vehicles and stuff like that. He said we're going too hard, too fast. It's going to be too expensive on people, and they've rolled back their deadlines.
Well, Dave, one of the things that's happened over there is that the realization is starting to sink in that producers can't make money generating electricity with offshore windmills. They just it's very similar to a rights sale in the Alberta oil patch. They had a rights sale for the right to put up windmills and generate power. Nobody bid on it. They can't make money. So if you can't generate the power that you want, then presumably you're going to have to make other plans to use that power that you thought you were going to have. So I guess I don't know whether it's back to coal in Great Britain or whether there's a business case for exporting natural gas from Canada to Great Britain. What about that?
There you go. Just to quickly touch base on the Romania thing again. What an insult to Calgary. What an insult to Alberta for the energy minister to leave this conference where he was scheduled to host Canada Night, fly to Ottawa to give Romania $3 billion for small. I mean, what an insult.
Well, I've written
and we tried Romania before, and it didn't quite work.
There was a CANDU reactor fiasco in Romania already once, and then 2014 it was announced that they were going to produce more in a Chinese SNC-Lavalin partnership.
Oh, what good could come out of that?
And SNC-Lavalin is also the one who will get the contract for this. So again, I mean, SNC can talk the language of nations that are prone to corruption because they know what that's all about. You start to see the motivation as to why we have to lend money to get people to buy our products when those products come from Quebec. But I guess just in closing, before we get to Jonathan, I could be mistaken, but I remember the last Petroleum Congress, I believe it was about 20 years ago. I think Jean Chrétien was in power at the time, but it was a much bigger affair. I remember the protests were a lot bigger in Calgary. Mm-hmm. They sanctioned off a big chunk of downtown, I think around the TELUS Convention Center, and they did a bunch out in Kananaskis, I think, as well. It seems like this event is a lot more subdued this time around.
I think you may be right. I think you also may be mixing up some of the G7 leaders. G7 leaders were out in Kananaskis. But the World Petroleum Show was big here Congress. Told you I keep screwing it up. 20 years ago.
That's a show.
I remember there was protests. The next one they had in Seattle, and that devolved into a riot and stuff like that. But there was a small demonstration on the weekend before the show officially kicked off, but very small.
Well, and that'll segue nicely into Jonathan and his coverage downtown. Maybe the problem is all our left-wing protesters are divided because they got so many things they want to protest all at once that they just spread themselves too thin and couldn't hit the Congress with all they had. So, Jonathan, I see you there. And what we've got going on, I guess, is this March for Kids going on. It's happening across the country in major cities. Maybe Dave, I'll get you to start though, and then tell us, kind of frame what this is about here before I talk to Jonathan.
Sure, it's the 1 Million March for Children is the official name of it. Started by Muslim groups in Canada who were worried about the lack of parental control in the classroom. started with New Brunswick, where they brought in a law to say parents have to be advised if the child wants to be known as a different gender, and Saskatchewan followed suit. And there was the predictable backlash from the left, and that prompted these Muslim groups to get together. They had weekly demonstrations in Calgary and other places that grew and grew and grew. So they decided to hold a national day today. And holy cow, it warmed the cockles of Nigel's cold heart to see the crowds in Ottawa, the crowds in Toronto, St. John, Lethbridge, Red Deer, Edmonton. The crowds were out everywhere. So there's a lot of people that have their eyes on this issue, a lot of people actively marching. And, Jonathan's at the one in Calgary. That's got thousands of people at it too.
Before we get to the cockles of Nigel's heart, we'll get Jonathan to report on what he's seen downtown. Then, what sort of turnout are we talking about, Jonathan? And how have, I guess, the proceedings been going?
The proceedings have been going well. It's been a busy day. I'm going to say a little over 1,000 people have shown up. I've seen people from every race, religion, different flags and different signs being displayed. There was a small counter protest happening across the street of about 100 people. I was able to speak with many of the protesters, and they told me that they were out here standing up for their children and defending parental rights. But when I went across the street to try to interview some counter protesters, one person said that I work for a Nazi newspaper.
Well, yeah, you're always going to get some of those. That's for sure. At least things have been, from our reports so far, at least where you're at, that nobody's been crossing the street or assailing each other or crossing the line or anything like that.
There's been some few heated exchanges between the two sides. There are police present. They're lining the streets, blocking the two sides. Were also mounted police, like on the horses, going around because the march did go from the Harry Hayes building to Calgary City Hall and then back. And they're going to be leaving for City Hall for a second time in about 15 minutes. And yeah.
Okay, sorry, I just saw Sean in the background was gelato. I'll go to Nigel, though. What are you feeling? Is it inspiring? We haven't seen something quite like this happen before.
Well, in one sense, for somebody with my convictions, it's a very inspiring thing. It's a bit of a sad thing that it took a group of people who weren't brought up here in Canada to get this rolling. What does that tell you about what we're teaching people in Canada? Everybody says, it's okay, Well, no, it's not okay when you define what the common sense of the ages is and try and pretend that men can have babies. And if a man says he's a woman, which is what the Prime Minister believes. Now, that kind of thing should be so obvious to people that they just say, well, that's ridiculous, and walk away. But apparently it isn't. The thing that puzzles me here is the union involvement, because a lot of the protests were orchestrated by a very strong message from a union leader in Hamilton saying, get out there and get in the face of the people on this million march. What's in it for the unions? I have to assume that in the end, if you follow it all the way back, it's money. It is, and it's power. It's the power to divert the money into curriculum and jobs for teachers, and everybody gets rich out of this. But I think it's appalling, frankly, that in this country, our teaching of our own people has led us to the point that we can't see simple, blindingly obvious things when they are right in front of our faces.
Well, and I'll ask Jonathan about this in a moment. It's almost a strategic inoculation, though, that unfortunately we're seeing the game of identity politics being played, but they've turned it around because the left, who loves the identity politics, has their victimhood hierarchy, and Islamic people and Muslims land quite high on it, but they forget that they're very social conservative people. The observant Muslims are very upset and offended by some of the things being taught in schools, and it makes it difficult. They're afraid to counter protest against another minority. I suspect, I'm just speculating, had it not been started through that course, we would see a lot more counter protesters actually and a lot more pushback on this, but they're kind of afraid.
Yes. Can I maybe just repeat a story from something that I wrote recently? And this is a true story. A friend of mine tells me about a colleague, an engineer from Pakistan who did very well in a major oil company in Calgary. He'd been here 20 years. Children were born here. And one day the 9-year-old comes back home after school and goes to mom and says, the teacher said if I wanted to kiss another girl, that would be just fine. So they started asking questions about what was going on in the classroom and what was being taught. And he said, look, that's how it's going to be. I'm out of here. And beginning of last year, he left, took his family with him, said, look, if the kids have got Canadian citizenship, if they want to come back, they can when they're older, but I am raising those kids back in Pakistan, where I know a little more what to expect, and I have more faith in what they will be taught. So, we make a big deal about immigration. It's supposed to be our strength, and we are chasing away good people. He is not the only one. And people who we should be keeping are finding that our way of life is actually destructive to their families, to their children. When the schools start coming in between the parent and the child, it's time to leave. They can, for the rest of us, it's time to do something. I'm glad to see that some people care enough to get out there and protest.
I think, Nigel, the mainstream media has a lot to answer for in this situation. Toronto Star columnist just last week wrote a column saying parents have no right to know anything about their children, and it was a matter between the kid and the teacher. So when you've got and CBC coverage of the protests today made it out to be hate groups trying to take gay rights and trans rights away from people, and that's just not the case at all. Mm-hmm. It's the exact opposite. I mean, this is a march for the parents to be able to have some say in their child's upbringing. So when you've got constant media like that hammering at you, it's no wonder Canadians are confused.
Yep, I agree. It all finds its way back to postmodernism that they've been teaching in universities and schools now for 50 years. So there is no real truth. So when you see something that's very obvious, no, that's not what, don't let your lying eyes deceive you. That's not what you're looking at.
So further, I'll check in with Jonathan one more time before we kind of let him go back, because they're going to be marching again. I guess just anecdotally, Jonathan, the original people who started this were Muslim groups, but are you seeing a lot of minority presence there, or is this, as you said, you saw a bit of everything, but is that the predominant group, or is it kind of a bit of everybody now?
I'm going to say with the Muslims, it's probably about 1/3 of the people who have shown up, which is a much larger than percentage of Calgary's population. I've seen many Sikhs, I've seen Black people, I've seen white people with Christians with the giant crosses, I've seen non-white Christians. It's really a collection of everyone here, and I've never seen anything like it.
Well, it's a singular event going on. We never would have thought we'd see it coming to this. So before I let you go to start getting ready to cover that march, is there anything else you'd like to report on or let us know before I let you go?
Well, one thing I would say is that they have a speaker area where they're having a variety of people come on and give speeches, and many of the speeches have been very positive. There was actually one, the organizer, Mahmoud Moura, who started it off by saying, we don't hate anyone, we believe in love for everyone, we just feel that the other side's misguided. And I feel that's the real point of the protest happening and what they're emphasizing.
Great. Okay. Well, we'll look forward to your reports and what else you see there, Jonathan. Stay safe down there.
No gelato for Jonathan.
No, apparently not, but I'm certain he can pick something up along the way out there. But, something Nigel said earlier, too, and it's something that's changed. As we know, we're different in view. I'm quite libertarian, quite socially liberal. But a line that crossed for me, and I think a lot of people down there, was the schools getting between the parents and the children. I don't want the state raising the kids. I have absolutely no issue with parents feeling that their children should embrace LGBTQ, if they are that way or not, or I support same-sex marriage. I have no issues with any of that. But that's up to the family on how the course of action is going to go with that, not the school system. And when you're told so arrogantly, as Dave said, by the Star, you don't have a right as a parent any longer to know what your children are up to. Again, that's not hateful as to why I would be supportive of this sort of protest. It's as a libertarian that you're infringing on my rights and choices as a parent.
Well, it's unfortunate that we've use the phrase parental rights, because really what we should be talking about is parental responsibilities. You know, rights sounds like you own them in a chattel sort of way. No, no, no. It is the responsibility of parents, because there is nobody better to do it than mom and dad. Parents will lay down their lives for their children, literally, in some, you know, in extreme circumstances. They will certainly do it if they decide to help pay for a college education. They will lay down their lives figuratively. No new Buick until the kids graduate. So there is nobody else who has that degree of commitment to children. There is the love of the mother for the child. There is the responsibility, the protective nature of the father. And people say, yeah, there's bad parents. Well, guess what? There are bad schools and there are unwise counselors. Nobody can be trusted to look after children like the parents. This is a protest in favor of parental responsibility, not parental rights.
It's a good way to put that. And I mean, part of it is just the activists. They seem to overstep. I mean, there's members of the LGBTQ community are getting tired of it. It's just never enough. You start to defy reality when we start putting out absurd images of pregnant men or you know, other such things as this. You know, common sense has to eventually take hold. And again, I was struck by, I mean, if people really felt this was truly an anti-gay protest, a real hate-filled, terrible event like this, I think we would see a heck of a lot more than 100 counter-protesters. A lot more people would be coming out and saying, no, we've got to nip this hate in the bud. And it's actually kind of a strikingly, especially with the amount of union effort and other efforts to get people out, it kind of fell flat.
Yeah, the Hamilton union leader that we were talking about was encouraging their members to follow protesters back to the car and intimidate them and whatnot. So far, you know, at the time of taping, everything's been peaceful, been lots of yelling and you know, giving of the middle finger and whatnot. But you know, it doesn't look like mass arrests or people getting stomped on by Ottawa police forces. But it's kind of got that convoy feeling, doesn't it? The freedom convoy feeling. You know, people are taking to the streets of Ottawa again by the thousands, and there's Jagmeet Singh behind a rainbow flag, and he's you know, trying to. Everything's a fight, right? Everything doesn't have to be a fight. It's just, I think you hinted at it earlier, Nigel. It's just common sense. You know, if you're a parent who cares about their kids and are interested in what they're learning at school, you want a say. And it's just there. It's just so easy. It shouldn't be an argument.
You know, the interesting thing is, where does this go from here? So they have their day of protest. They get 1 million or they get 500,000, whatever they get. The other side turns out and screams at them. Tomorrow, what are the kids going to get in the classroom? Same stuff. Same stuff.
And the Prime Minister who thinks a man can be a woman if he or she says so. So yeah.
So that I hope, you know.
But you know, we have seen the government of New Brunswick, Saskatchewan, say they're going to put laws in to protect parental rights, parental responsibilities, as you say. I certainly see the same thing coming from Daniel Smith's UCP in Alberta. Quebec, Ontario, their education ministers have all come out and said that, you know, the parents have every right. So I think that the pendulum is slowly turning, and you know, credit to the Muslims for organizing and getting the rest of their Canadian comrades to wake up and smell the roses.
You bet.
That's it. The people out there are people who don't typically protest. I mean, they've got better things to do on a Wednesday, you know, with their time. The people, I mean, as I said on my show earlier, I drove through, you know, where they were already getting staged on each side when I was coming downtown this morning. There were a lot of early goers to it. And you know, on 4th Avenue, I could see the counter protesters on the left. And I recognized already a couple of the chronics. They show up for everything. That's their thing. They're career protesters. That's fine. They're going to show up no matter what happens. And they're going to call people things like they did with Jonathan and stuff like that. But the parents, the Islamic people, they aren't typically out there. And that should be more striking to people as well. They aren't constantly protesting. They aren't that experienced at it. And it's just good that it hasn't gotten violent.
And that's a group that normally votes Liberal.
Yeah.
And that's a section of the population that I think will not vote Liberal in the next election, and that can't be overlooked.
Yeah, and by the way, thumbs up to Jonathan for getting out there and taking it. He's ballsy.
It's unpleasant going amongst a bunch of people who've got that much vitriol within them.
Especially when you have no gelato.
Yeah, he's not getting any of the benefits today. But and something that struck me before when the Islamic some groups were protesting and getting upset with some of these school decisions was a statement from Justin Trudeau where he implied that they've been misled by conservative rhetoric. This was a few weeks ago.
American conservative rhetoric, if you recall.
But how patronizing. He was basically saying they're too stupid to see through rhetoric, and they've been fooled, and the wool's been pulled over their eyes. They're well aware of what they're doing, what they think, what their values are. And to have the Prime Minister imply such, I mean, again, in the typical fashion of Justin Trudeau, he just poured more gas on the fire.
That was painful. Painful to watch.
Maybe that's why he's trailing by 15 points in the polls. People are starting to wake up.
One among many, many reasons I'm certain he's trailing. So I'll get on to our Prime Minister for our next subject as we pivot here. Before I do, I should remind everybody as well as to how and why we stay independent. It's not just the sponsors like the CSSA, but it's you guys who've taken out memberships. So for viewers, guys, if you've already taken out a membership with us, thank you very much. We really, really appreciate it. If you haven't yet, get on there, westernstandard.news/membership. $9.99 a month, $100 a year. It's a good deal for the amount of news content you're getting, the opinion content, and it helps get people like Jonathan out there taking his abuse on the street, and people like Sean out there living in the lap of luxury, eating gelato in prayer rooms. But we really do appreciate it, and we need that. And that's how we can continue to proudly say we do not take any tax dollars, and we will not. Okay, getting on to Prime Minister Trudeau. So he really kicked off the parliamentary session with quite a bombshell this week, Dave. We've never seen an accusation like this out of the Canadian Parliament.
No, why do we let this guy go to India? It's a fiasco every time. Yeah, but he stood up and he did drop a bombshell. He accused Indian agents of being behind the murder of Hardeep Singh Nijjar, who was gunned down outside a mosque in Surrey 3 months ago. He blamed the government of India, and jaws dropped in the House of Commons, and Pierre Poilievre delivered an eloquent response, and Jagmeet Singh delivered an angrier response, as you would expect from Jagmeet being a Sikh. But this story has got all sorts of mysterious angles to it. Cory, Trudeau apparently went around to the Five Eyes, Australia, Great Britain, and the United Kingdom, and told them about this before he announced it publicly in Canada, to try and get them to support Canada in the announcement and their outrage, and they all ignored him, which is not a good sign, obviously, for Trudeau. Nigel wrote a great column today. He'll pontificate on why we should be careful of this. But it's the only other Canadian we can ever remember being assassinated by a foreign power was a gentleman called Gerald Bull, who was working with Iraq to develop super long guns. And he was killed in Belgium by the Israelis in 1990. So it's very, very rare occurrence, Cory.
Well, it's rare for Canadians to be involved. I mean, I think it's sort of stock in trade if you're dealing in Eastern Europe or South America, but certainly this is an unusual incident. But, the Prime Minister, if asked, would probably say, well, I didn't actually accuse them. I said there was credible allegations that with a potential link. Okay, you have just accused them, sir. You can't split hairs like that. And I think the overall takeaway from this is that if the Prime Minister of Canada has evidence that this took place, there should be charges. And in the absence of charges, he should shut up, because there are much bigger things going on here, not the least of which is developing Canadian trade with India. But in the big global picture, these people are our allies, whether he likes it or not, whether Mr. Singh, Jagmeet, likes it or not. India and Canada are on the same side. They're both democracies. They both aspire to the same things, and they're both worried, frankly, about the rise of China. So if you are going to irritate your strongest allies, you better have the evidence to back it up. This was reckless and irresponsible, and frankly takes idiocy to a level that, frankly, in the last couple of decades, only Mr. Trudeau has ever attained.
Well, you saw the scenes from the G20 in India, very cool between Prime Minister Modi and Trudeau, and it hadn't even been made public then. But the relationship between India and Canada is now in tatters. You remember Trudeau's first visit there when he embarrassed everybody dressing up and flouting around there. But a Team Canada trade mission to India that was supposed to go was canceled this week. So that shows you some of the fallout. And Nigel, I'd like to ask you a question. It must hurt because you were, as the chief speechwriter for Prime Minister Harper, you saw how hard he worked to build that relationship with India over his decade in power. That's now just left a smoldering pile.
Yeah, well, it's like so many other things that the Conservative government accomplished over that 10 years, almost 10 years during which they led the country. Obviously, when the Liberals came in, they had very, very different ideas, and piece by piece, they took it apart. And but you saw some things vanish, and you thought, well, at least the major planks in what we did are so obviously and self-evidently of worth that they're not going to screw with that. Well, the Indian relationship was one of those major planks. We were marketing Canadian energy to the atomic energy to India. We were marketing the fuel to go with it. Comes from Saskatchewan. We were trying to develop the export of grains and lentils and all kinds of things that they were in the mood to buy. And there was a very strong personal affection between Harper and Modi. Like they got on well. They could sort of go into the room. All the aides could just sort of sit back, and these two would talk. And they were
both
on the
economists,
same page.
right? Both economists.
Yeah. But they could talk, and like so much of what gets done at the international level, in the end, comes down to, can you get along with the other guy? Harper and Modi got along just fine. You see the photographs of them smiling together. Modi came back, did a visit in Ottawa in 2015, just a few months before the election. It was very obvious to anybody that this was a good, strong relationship, and trade was going to fall out of that. It tatters, I think you said earlier.
Tatters. I remember one of the striking photos out of the G20, Canadian press photographer took it. I don't think any Canadian papers ran it. It was Joe Biden, his finger in Trudeau's face, lecturing him.
Yeah.
And do we have any standing left in the international world anymore, or has he completely torn it down?
He's not respected.
He's not. Is he not respected anywhere?
No. Well, and certainly we've got a very similar picture from Xi in China, telling him exactly where the exits are. So you've got the two most populous countries in the world, China and India, each with close to 1.5 billion people. Neither of the leaders of either of those countries can stand the sight of Mr. Trudeau in their presence. And I haven't seen the picture of Biden that you're speaking of, but it sounds like that's not going very well either.
No, I don't think so.
And to play a bit of a devil's advocate, I mean, it's not beyond belief. There's some very complicated politics going on in India. It's a complicated, diverse country. They have a Khalistani separatist issue going on. There's some of those battles have leaked into other countries where the populations have moved out. Potentially, maybe government agents had done it. We don't know. That's the thing, is he hasn't provided any evidence. But the thing is, would they do it to a country they respect? See, that's something we're talking about as well. It's not like Canada's a big military power and could do something, but if we were respected, then maybe, we're not going to meddle in Canada. We'll try diplomatically dealing with this or other ways rather than if, again, that's what happened.
Okay, when I'm pouring cold water on what the Prime Minister has said, I'm not discounting the fact that it's quite possible that something like this did happen. But he has not given us any reason. He has not shown us enough evidence to press charges. And until he has that, he should have been quiet about it.
And I think this is going to end up being a similar case to the Chinese election meddling. I'll bet you dollars to donuts. The Trudeau government was warned about this situation years ago, and the developing frustration with the Khalistan movement and the anger that it generates. So I'm sure the Canadian military, or not the military, the CSIS was on top of it. There were warnings that this guy may be a target before he was targeted. So people could see it coming.
What we need is a special rapporteur.
Rapporteur. No. What's David Johnson doing at the moment?
Yeah, he's between jobs. But
could use a job.
I mean, I don't know if he'd gotten a specific warning about this particular man as a target, though people knew he was certainly a character who was not in good books with India in general. If he wasn't part of the separatist movement, he certainly flirted very heavily with them. And I think it was kind of common knowledge he was a representative of that movement. But Trudeau was warned at least of the interference back in 2017. I had the good fortune of having Sam Cooper on my show today.
Oh, yeah.
We talked about that, and he put that out on the Bureau, his site there. So he's been getting a lot of those CSIS documents have been coming his way. And Trudeau was warned of that in 2017. He was warned it's a big and growing issue in lower mainland BC, that there are agents getting to work down in there, interfering with politics. And it's getting dangerous, and there were action plans that actually Prime Minister Harper had already started the process on, and Trudeau responded his government by basically shutting down those plans and pushing aside the warning. And then he went off to his India trip and embarrassed us.
See, that's one more thing in the list of things that we did that they took apart. I hadn't actually known about that one.
Yeah, I hadn't either, actually, until Mr. Cooper, broke it down. There was already a process. This was known. This has been known for a while. Russia's been meddling around over here too. I mean, this is what rogue countries kind of do. But for Trudeau to continue to ignore the warnings of our security agencies, what's the point of these agencies if you're not going to take seriously when they tell you, hey, we got a problem starting?
Yeah, it was certainly striking. For months now, Trudeau's been trying to push the China interference under the rug and ignore it and whatnot. But then as soon as this thing breaks, he's making statements in Parliament. He's sort of handling them differently.
Well, I think that he needed some sort of an alibi for the shocking performance that he left behind in India. And this, at the time, it seemed like a good idea. I have to wonder whether he still thinks it was such a good idea. But at the time, it came back, well, this is what's been going on. That's why they hated me.
Could very well be.
He can be that trivial.
He doesn't have good relationship with good ideas in general, and kicking off Parliament. I mean, that's part of what kind of grates on me as well. If this was a crisis, if this was what's going on, if this was something worthy of announcement, you don't need to do it there. You can do a press conference as soon as you found out about it, if that's what should be done. But he made political theater of it. He used that as an opportunity, I think, to distract the opening of the parliamentary session from his own incompetence on the economic file and everything else he's touched. Yep.
No argument.
Agreed. Is, distressing. I mean, now he's lobbed a diplomatic turd into the punch bowl with India that it could take multiple governments to try and mend this relationship.
Yeah, these foreign leaders, they have long memories. I think it'll be a while before Mr. Trudeau goes back to India, if ever.
If ever, yeah.
Well, and it's a breach of trust, I think, on the diplomatic front in general. I mean, diplomacy, it's a tricky, specialized, sensitive world in general. It means that you don't necessarily like the person you're in the room dealing with or some of the actions, but you're very careful about how you're going to publicly speak about what that other leader is doing or what their country's actions have been.
Well, Cory, international relations is not the same as retail politics. And Mr. Trudeau, I give him his due, he is very good at what we call retail politics. Walk in a room, smile, shake hands with people, say the right thing. He can do that. I mean, there are times when he's made a mess of it, but overall, that's one of his strengths. But the canniness that goes with with international relations and the willingness to take the advice of the people who do it on a full-time basis. He seems to have real struggles with that. And then just the plain common sense, if you don't have the evidence, don't make idle claims.
Exactly. Show us the evidence.
You know, because when they say put up or shut up, what are you going to do?
Well, and other leaders are going to feel, I think, even less inclined to confide in other affairs or issues that are sensitive. I mean,
Absolutely.
That's part of it too. If something's blowing up in Australia and they're wanting other, well, I don't want to talk to that Trudeau about it. We've got to deal with this carefully, and I don't know what that fellow's going to say, because he doesn't seem to be able to maintain discretion or thoughtfulness on these issues.
Well, you can see it on the in the Five Eyes, where basically Canada's being left out. NATO had their biggest air maneuvers in history a month or so ago in Europe, and not a single Canadian plane was there. The big nuclear, the submarine deals that have been going on between Britain and Australia and France and Australia, Canada just gets ignored, overlooked, because they don't want to deal with Trudeau. And it's hurting us just on so many fronts. It's not funny anymore.
It's such a shame. And Canada did have a good reputation as as I've said before, punching above our weight as a smaller nation, but being wise, diplomatic, and standing in strong support of issues. I mean, even Pearson, as a Liberal, was still very respected on the world stage, and we're a long way away from there now.
Yeah, I think we're down in the flyweight division. Can't go any lower.
Well, it's if you're a young person, it may not be on your mind, but in 1945, when Canada came out of the Second World War, it was the fourth strongest military power in the world. Now, I grant you that some of the really strong ones had just been defeated and taken off the chessboard, but Great Britain, the United States, the Soviet Union, then Canada, 100-ship Navy, more aircraft than we've ever had since. 1 million people out of a population of 11 million put on uniform. It was an incredible effort. And of course, the battle honors, and you look through them, are there. They remain today. And it's just such an area of endeavor that this government doesn't even care about, never mind make an effort at. All they're worried about is using the armed forces as a place where they can do social experiments. Soldiers can wear their hair long, paint their nails, come to cross-dress if that's what pleases them. And the good guys are getting out, and what's going to be left?
Is there any wonder there are thousands of soldiers short of what they need?
Well, I mean, Linda, our columnist, Linda Sabotin, our friend and colleague, Linda, put out a column about 2 weeks ago saying, don't believe the government messaging. The actual number of troops out of an establishment of 68,000 is more like about 34, and it's going down to 30 by Christmas. And this is what she got from sources that she couldn't disclose. So,
it's a good thing the world is so calm now, and there's no chance of fighting anywhere at the moment.
Damn it, you get me on the show and you get me all riled up, and I get angry, and then I go and write columns. Is this just a trick?
Wait, so I have my show to vent it out
and
get it out of my system. Oh, well, I'm sure we're still a strong and great nation in many ways.
We can't forget that.
We're in a rough spot and period, and we will get past it, even if it does feel interminable right now. So that's all the time we've got today. Thank you very much, Dave, Nigel.
Thank you. Pleasure.
Good fun, though blood pressure raising conversation, and we'll do it all again next week at this time. So thanks for joining us, everybody out there, and we'll see you then.
Here's what commodity prices are doing in Lethbridge today. Cash barley remains at $3.40. Feed wheat is steady at $3.55, while October corn is unchanged at $3.50, and November-December is trading at $3.18 per metric ton. In the milling wheat markets, December Minneapolis futures are higher 1 1/4 cents at $7.81 per bushel, with local hard red spring bid for October movement at $9.55 per bushel. Looking at canola, November futures added $3.10 at $7.3740 per ton, with delivered buys for October movement at $16.72 per bushel. In the pulse markets, nearby red lentil prices are higher 1/2 cent at 36.5 cents per pound, and yellow peas are lower 25 cents at $10.75 per bushel. In the cattle markets, October live cattle are up 75 cents at 186.43 per hundredweight. For more information on pricing or picked up options, give me a call at 403-394-1711. I'm Matt Buscombe at Marketplace Commodities. Accurate real-time marketing information and pricing options.
Canadian Shooting Sports Association. Without the CSSA, our gun rights would have been taken long ago. These guys are on the front lines helping to draft smart and intelligent firearms regulations and legislation in Canada, and more importantly, educating the public about how we keep guns out of the hands of the wrong people. To become a member, it's absolutely worth every penny. You can become a Western Standard member for just $10 a month or $99 a year for unlimited access